I want to talk about the 5 highest paying jobs that I've seen in video production on the freelancing side. And if you've seen any of my videos before, you know I typically talk about creating a video production company because then you get leverage. You could use freelancers to do jobs for you so you're not directly trading time for money. This is a little bit of a different video because I want to talk about the freelancing side because running a video production company is not for everyone. So for people that want to build out a freelance career and want to focus on making the most money for their time, these are the 5 jobs that I've seen through the 15 years of working in this business that make the most amount of money per day. Now I'm going to exclude some of the non-technical jobs like director, producer, actor, writer. Those people obviously will make the highest pay on typically any jobs. Like for example, a director could get 10% of the entire budget sometimes for a production. So I'm going to exclude those and I'm going to focus on the technical side of filmmaking. The first one on the list is STEADICAM operators, and this is what I tried to do a long time ago as well. One of the people I first met in the business, he was a STEADICAM operator, and randomly one day on a shoot, he told me that he was making $2,000 that day. And at the time I was making like $300, I think, being an assistant camera operator. And I was just thinking, wow, $2,000 for one day of work? And he told me that he also had a mentor that told him the fastest way to become a millionaire in production was being a Steadicam operator. Now, this is before we really knew anything about the business side and running our own company, but I dug into this a little bit more back then and I became a Steadicam, or what I thought was a Steadicam operator. It turns out I really wasn't cut out for it because it actually took a heavy investment to become a Steadicam operator at the level. But basically what I found later, and now because we do hire Steadicam operators through my production company, Steadicam operators could make anywhere from $2,500 per day to like $4,000 per day. Now, the thing with Steadicam operators is they always work with their own gear. So they typically have a Steadicam rig, and these higher rate Steadicam operators on higher end commercial and high end corporate projects typically have a rig that's anywhere from $60,000 to $100,000. So it's a heavy investment to get into the game, but they don't typically own a camera. They have a Steadicam rig that they invest in. And you could level up. Like when I first bought my Steadicam Flyer back in the day, that was about a $5,000 investment, but I just didn't pursue that path because it just took a really heavy toll on my body, and my back hurts still to this day because I just didn't do the job correctly. Now, there are other specialties too with camera movement that could demand that kind of a high day rate. And typically they also work with their own rigs. And even high-end drone pilots, even though now everybody seems to have a drone, there's still those high-end drone pilots with higher-end drones, the ones that could fly out Arri Alexas and Red cameras, where they could also demand really high day rates as well. The next one on the list is sound mixers. And to this day, we hire sound mixers almost every single week. And with the higher end sound mixers, basically, they work with their package as well. So there's their labor, but their gear is built into their labor. And typically in production, what ends up happening is gear and labor is 2 separate things. So if you work as a cinematographer or a director of photography, for example, your rate and the gear rate is 2 separate things that you would bill for even if you own the gear. Sound mixers bundle that typically just like Steadicam operators. That's why their day rate typically seems to be a bit higher. So for example, a good sound mixer at the level of commercial and corporate work that we do could charge about $1,000 just for their labor, but then it's a additional cost built into the rate for their gear. And a basic sound package could be like $300 to $400. That's multiple lavs and a boom and a mixer. So you're looking at $1,200, $1,400, sometimes $1,800 depending on how many lavs they have for the day. Okay, so that again takes some investment because at that level you have to buy electrosonic lavalier mics typically. Basically mics that could be $2,000 to $3,000 per pack. So you can't just show up with a $500 Sennheiser and demand that kind of rate typically. And they have a high-end mixer. But those sound mixers make a lot of money, especially later on when they get on narrative content like TV shows and they get on with a whole package, maybe up to 10 lavs, they make a crazy amount of money working 5 days a week. So that's really something that most people don't pursue because they typically want to be DPs and directors and things like that. But that is another option for really making a high day rate on production. The next one is a bit surprising, but assistant directors, again on commercial production and high-end corporate productions, typically could demand a pretty high day rate. Now, they could make anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500, and they don't have any type of gear. They don't have to invest in gear. They literally have to use their brain on the job to make sure everything goes according to plan. So they do lots of different things. On smaller jobs where there's only one assistant director, to the director, basically they put together the call sheet. They will make sure the day goes according to plan. They do a lot on the organizational side, but on the day of the shoot, they make sure everything goes to schedule. And then when you're looking at a $50,000, $100,000 shoot day, paying someone $1,500 to make sure you don't go overtime is so well worth it, right? This comes at the higher end, but assistant director is one of those jobs that's really interesting and could demand a high day rate, and you don't really need an investment in gear. Number 4 surprised me, but there are stylists on set that could get anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 for this type of production. And those are typically a food stylist or like a prop stylist. Now, I personally do a lot of food production, and I've done so as a DP too. And I've worked with a lot of food stylists. I mean, in fact, to this day, we still hire food stylists quite a bit. Their job is to just make sure the food looks good on video, but they do a lot of stuff in the still photography side of things too. So they work quite a bit. And they could demand, again, anywhere between $1,200 to $1,600. And they usually demand having an assistant, which the assistant could make $800 to $1,000 per day. So this is a really interesting job because it technically is not filming anything, right? You're just making sure what's on camera looks good. So it's an interesting job for people that may not have a traditional background. Maybe you're good at cooking and just presenting things or putting things together to be presentable. So that's an interesting job I wanted to point out because I was really blown away by what kind of rate they have. And you really can't find a good prop or food stylist that is not charging these rates, because typically it's a pretty tight-knit community. Like in Chicago, I know pretty much 20, 30 different food stylists, and that's all of them, right? So they communicate to make sure no one's taking advantage of their rate. Same thing with sound mixers. They typically have private groups, and they make sure they stay within the same world so no one is undercutting people when they're at that level. Now, number 5 is what I've done as a freelancer and what I do still through my production company, which is a cinematographer or a director of photography. Now, this is a level up from being a camera operator, right? So you basically have to know how to compose, light, and shoot any scene, right? Typically at the higher levels, when I'm director or photographer, I don't shoot. I sit behind a monitor and I make sure the gaffer handles the lighting side with their team, and I make sure the camera operators get the shots that I'm looking for, and they have a little team as well. But at that level, at the very low end, you could get $1,200 per day, and at the very high end, you could go really, really high. But in this type of commercial corporate shoots, at the very high end, you could get about $4,000. And when you look at things for television and movies, sometimes that could be over $10,000 per day. That's just a day rate. But on the lower end, typically, especially on non-union jobs, really $1,200 is the max you could get. So if you want to make more than $1,200, you do have to join the union here for cinematographers. Now, the interesting thing is, typically, the rates I'm mentioning here for cinematographers absolutely does not include gear. You should be charging for gear separately anyway. That's just how the whole business is set up. Always has been done that way. But at a higher rate, let's say you get to a point where your director of photography rate for your labor is $2,000. Then you could invest in a really high-end camera, right? And then you could also charge for that on top of your day rate. So if you have a camera package that could go for $1,500, now you're making $3,500. You do have to allocate that $1,500 towards the camera. Typically, you would get those on a loan when they're that expensive, which again, I don't recommend, but that is typically a way a lot of cinematographers buy high-end cameras. But you really are getting to that next level. And then you get to that world with the sound mixers and STEADICAM operators where you really are a bundle. So you bring the whole camera package, lenses, tripods, everything as a whole package for the production. Makes the producer's job a little bit easier since they don't have to go rent out a camera package. Now, all these rates are a little bit on the higher side because I'm talking about a higher end production, typically more than a $50,000 production as a whole. So at the lower end, you probably are nowhere near these rates, and that's completely okay. I'm just wanted to explain that this is where you could level up maybe after a decade of experience to get these rates. So then at that level, you really typically end up working 100 days a year on these productions, and you make a pretty good living. But let me know in the comment section what your experience is and what your rates are if you do any one of these 5 jobs. I hope you found this useful, and I'll see you next week.